So in this video I'm going to show you how to do a single crochet foundation row, which is also known as a chainless foundation row, because we make the base chain at the same time as we make the stitch, which avoids the scenario where you have to make a long chain and then work into each chain. So in this demonstration I'm using a 4mm hook and Langzooned yarn, which is 100% Shetland wool from Donna Smith Designs. I'll put a link in the video caption for that. So we're going to start with a slip knot loop on the hook. And then I like to start with a chain 2 and make that second chain a little bit tighter. It's just that I find if I do a chain 1, which is technically what you should do, I end up with a very shrunken stitch at the beginning. So we're now going to work into the back ridge. So when you're doing these foundation rows, it's worth bearing in mind that you're stacking stitches horizontally rather than working them vertically, which is what you're generally used to. So I'm going to make the first single crochet, which is a UK double foundation stitch. So I'm going into the back ridge of the chain and I'm going to pull up a loop. So technically that's us joining the new stitch at the base of the previous stitch. Then I'm going to yarn over and I'm only going to chain off the first loop on the hook. So technically that is now our first foundation chain. So if you turn it this way up, you can see that that chain I've just made is going to be running along the bottom of the work. And now I'm going to yarn over and draw off both stitches. So that step was literally making the stitch. So see how I've stacked the stitch horizontally on top of my chain, but obviously then when we finish the work it will be this way up. So let's do the next stitch. So there's the chain that I made previously after I joined my yarn to the starting chain. I'm going to go into the left loop of that chain and then straight behind it I'm going to also pick up the back ridge of that chain. I'm going to pull up a loop. So when you pull up that loop you need to make sure it's level with this loop on the hook. Okay, otherwise you'll get like the banana effect, which is where the bottom of your foundation row is going to curve because it's too tight. So this needs to be pulled up so it's level. So that's our join. Then we're going to yarn over and chain off that first loop that we pulled up. That is now basically going to be the bottom of the foundation row. Then we're going to yarn over and draw off 2, which is forming the stitch. So that's stitch number 2. Note there's that chain we made. So again we're going into the left loop of the chain, into the back ridge of that chain, pulling up a loop to join, making sure it's level, yarning over, pulling through to make the foundation chain, and then yarn over, draw off 2 to make the actual stitch. Let's make another one. You can, once you've done a few, it's easier to see. As with most crochet things, it's always this starting off that's tricky, and once you get going it's much easier to see what you're doing. So here you can see 1, 2, 3. You can see the 3 chains that I made at the base of the stitch. It will be the base when it's this way up, but as we work it we're working the stitches horizontally. So let's join the next stitch. So we go left loop of that chain that's facing us and back ridge of that chain, and then we pull up a loop. So that's the join. That's joining the next stitch. Then we're going to yarn over and chain off the first loop. So that's making the actual foundation chain. And then we're going to yarn over and draw off 2. So that's making the stitch. So every time you make one of these you have to think about those 3 steps. The join at the base of the stitch, the chain, and then the actual stitch that you're making. So it's the same for any stitch you're doing, not just a single crochet or UK double. Let's just do a couple more. You can see the chains quite clearly now. So left hand loop of the chain, back ridge of the chain, pull up a loop, make sure that's level. You often have to give it a little bit more space there. Yarn over, draw off the first loop to make a chain, which is the chain running along the bottom there. Yarn over, draw off all two to make the stitch. Into that side chain, pull up a loop, yarn over to make a chain. I actually like to hold that chain straight after I've made it, and then yarn over, draw off two to make the stitch. So it's a join, make the chain at the base, make the stitch. So there you can see that is where you'll be working into. So that's the top of the row, and then you've got the bottom of this foundation row that you can work into. So that looks like a chain, it looks like the top of that stitch but slightly squished, and that's been achieved really by crocheting into the left loop and the back ridge, so it creates what looks like a stitch but technically it's not. However, obviously that can be worked into just like a normal stitch, so that's the beauty of it really. As I said, if you find it's bananaing like this, that will be because where you're joining the yarn and making that first chain, you are not you're making it too tight. So for example, quite often people will pull up a loop and then immediately chain one and then make the next stitch, and you can immediately see the difference there. The top of that stitch is quite big and then that one is tiny, so over time it will just start to bend. You need to make sure the gauge of your integrated foundation chain is the same as the stitch at the top here. So when you pull up that loop, you always want to be making sure your work is completely perpendicular and that this loop is pulled up horizontal. So notice how this loop is slightly longer than that loop. That's what you need to do to keep the tension neat. So this is one of those things, it's quite tricky really to get this foundation row looking super neat, and oftentimes you might need to have a few goes, or at least pull back to sections that are not quite looking right. So yeah, so basically that's it. So if you give that a go, let me know in the comments. I always love to know whether you've tried out any of my videos.